All the way back in 2010, before anybody and everybody had a podcast, Wholesaler Masterminds Radio was on the air. Now it's in a whole different feed at iTunes, but there are some shows in there I want you to hear. Now rest assured, we've done our best to clean them up because the originals sounded a lot like AM radio, but they are no less important because there's great speakers and trainers and authors and thought leaders. And that's why in this feed at the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio show, we're going to start dropping in our archived series. And you'll see that designated in the feed, so please enjoy. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds Radio Show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore.
Wholesalers, welcome to another episode of Wholesaler Masterminds Radio. I hope you've been consuming all the awesome content that we're assembling for you. And boy, oh boy, wait till you see what's coming down the pike, folks. I mean, we got some awesome Wholesaler Mastermind Radio shows that are in the can and yet to be released. We've got that book I've been teasing you about. You know, I'm working my fingers to the bone trying to get you Brotherhood of the Bag, a wholesaler's handbook. It's coming. I promise you it's coming. Plus everything else in terms of our learning opportunities to our MP3s. If you haven't been out to the website in a little bit, jump out to wholesalermasterminds.com and check it out. So I don't know if you've noticed a trend here happening at Wholesaler Mastermind Radio, but the sheer weight of our guests, and please, I don't mean to denigrate any of our guests that were in episodes 2, 10, 12, but boy, oh boy, the caliber of our guests is going up in big time, as evidenced by today's guest. I don't know if you're familiar with the name Joe Calloway, but I'll bet you're familiar with his cornerstone book. It was rather groundbreaking. It received rave reviews from the New York Times and Retailing Today and Publishers Weekly. It was called Becoming a Category of One: How Extraordinary Companies Transcend Commodity and Defy Comparison. He's written a host of books. He travels around the country. He's one of the most in-demand speakers. And it's our great pleasure to have Joe Calloway here on Wholesaler Masterminds Radio. Joe, welcome, welcome, welcome.
My pleasure to be here, Rob. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we want to talk a little bit today about how we take your message of Category of One and then also blend that together with some new messaging that you're doing in an upcoming book. Speaking of working one's fingers to one's bones, I know you're working on a book called The Best at What Matters Most. But let's start with where you have really spent so much time and time successfully, this notion of Category of One. Let's start with the basic concept. What does it mean?
Well, in its simplest form, it means, why should I choose you instead of your competition? It's funny that if we could show a picture, Rob, the cover of the book explains the whole concept visually. It's got 4 red apples in a row, and they all look exactly alike. And set apart from them is one green apple. And there's an obvious difference between the green apple and the red apples. And so the premise is, how do you get to be the green apple? And what I've discovered is when you look at market leaders, whether they're huge companies, I mean, you know, the usual suspects like Apple or Southwest Airlines or on and on and on with all these companies that people talk about all the time, or a small business, or like me, a one-person business. When you look at companies, organizations, top performers that are able to not just create success, but sustain it, and that's the key. I mean, it's one thing to become successful, but to stay there, particularly with what's been going on with the economy the last few years, that's the real trick. And when you look at those entities that have been able to do that, they all have a lot of things in common. And so that's what becoming a Category of One is about. What is it that top performers do that I can do without writing a check with the resources that I already have if I just choose to do it?
Let's talk about a little of those because, you know, what you said right at the tail end there, in addition to everything else, of course, but what you said right at the tail end there really resonates with me, and that is, what can I do that's in my control that allows me to be a Category of One? Because as an employee of a major financial service firm, I am but a cog in the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, boy, oh boy, there's a lot that I can do locally with my clients. Give me some ideas of ways that I am either creating the success or, as you said, sustaining the success.
Let me go to the one that I think is one of the most powerful, and also I think it's really pertinent to the folks that are listening today.
Okay.
Which is, and Rob, I've said forever. I've said if I could have one competitive advantage above all others, it would be this. Let me know more about and understand the customer better than anybody else, and I'll take that one all day long. And I think, well, I'll point to an example. I was invited into the CEO's office of a fairly big company that I was doing business with, and he said, the vendors that work with us, I generally don't have these kinds of one-on-one conversations with them like I'm having with you. But the reason that I want to talk to you and the reason that we consider you not just a vendor but a partner is, listen to this, Rob. He said, you get us. You get what we're trying to do here, and you don't talk about just what you do. You talk about how what you do helps us accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. He said, that's the big difference. You get it. And I look at, and I'm not blowing smoke. It's just that it's such a great example. I look at I Carry the Bag. I look at your magazine. And I think the great differentiator there is you get your audience. I mean, other entities may dabble in it, but this is your turf. This is what you do. And I think whenever we can go to our clearly defined, clearly targeted marketplace, which the folks listening today, they have a clearly defined marketplace. When you can convince those financial advisors out there that, look, I get it. I understand who you are, what you're about, what you're trying to do, and you can do that better than the other guy or gal, that is a huge advantage. It's simply knowledge of and understanding of the customer.
Joe,
and that's where I spend a ton of my time, is I'm trying to achieve that advantage.
Let's jump off on that side street for a second, because you talk about something that's so important, and it's so good that you bring it up. Wholesalers, we talk all the time about the importance of you doing your homework.
Yeah.
We talk all the time about you having a granular understanding of how an advisor works their business in such a way that you can at least, on a cursory level, begin to get at where their pain is and what's important to them. Joe, what's when you're doing your homework on a company? So let's go down the side street for just 1 second.
Sure,
As you're doing your homework on a company, what sort of things and tools and perhaps sites, what are you looking at that helps you get the dirt that you need to make that solid impression?
Yeah, well, and listen, I know that your audience, that they're good at what they do. We're talking to people that because they wouldn't be listening to you if they weren't good. Because it's people that are good at what they do that always want to get better.
Yes.
But a couple of things that are really useful to me when I call on a big part of my business is banks, for example. And one of the things that I do is I'll, of course, go to their website. And whether it's a bank or any other kind of business, I always go to they will either call it the press room, or they will call it the media page, or they will call it recent news. And for me to be in a conversation with someone in a bank and say to them, well, I know that your CEO for the last 12 years had a real strong background in sales, and your new CEO is an operations guy. And from what I understand, that's bringing some different philosophies of how to do business to the organization. Just to drop in those kinds of, look, I know who you are. I know what's going on there. And then, of course, the other thing is to gold mine as much as I possibly can through conversations with whoever I can talk to, and finding out, the obvious things like what are your goals, what are your objectives, but also dig into, well, what are your frustrations? Here's the thing. If I can do something good for somebody, that's okay. If I can stop the pain, that's gold. It's like there are people that can do good things. That's fine. But then there are people that can stop the pain, and that carries some real value.
Boy, would you agree that I've always operated under this premise? I want to kind of check it back with you. So for as long as I've been in this dimension of my career, talking about MQ, memorability quotient, which has some attributes that are, of course, similar to category of one, this differentiation thing being one, of course. It has always dawned on me, and again, check back with you and your experience, that some of the things that we talk about in terms of category of one differentiation, they aren't necessarily these Herculean efforts that cause someone to register us most positively and think back on us most fondly. It's doing those things that other people don't want to do, too lazy to do. They skim across the surface and don't take a moment to go even just 12 inches deep. And even that depth, as shallow as it is deep enough to make an impact. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. That kind of gets to, Rob, the core idea in the book I'm working on right now, which is called Be the Best at What Matters Most.
Okay.
And it takes a wildly contrarian approach, which is this: win inside the box. Now, a big part of the book is about innovation, new ideas, creativity. But where do you want to innovate? Innovate and be better on the basics. Here's the deal. If you win on the basics, you win. It's funny, and you talk about the not going deep enough. There are people that will roll their eyes and say, oh, my gosh, these guys are talking about knowing the customer. Haven't you got something new? No. Let's stay right there. Go deeper with that. Listen, if you are the most consistent on delivering the goods on what matters most to your market, you win. And you're right. There are people that get distracted by trying to come up with a wow factor. The greatest wow factor is to do what you said you were going to do, when you said you were going to do it, the way you said you were going to do it, and do it incredibly consistently and in a way that people like doing business with you. If you do that, Rob, you win.
Boy, you just said something there. I want to nibble on a little bit more here. You said this win inside the box. Now,
yeah,
we have folks all the time telling us we got to think outside the box. We got to think outside the box. So let's help our listeners just kind of understand a little bit of the differentiation between thinking outside the box and winning inside the box, because I think I could benefit from a little of that dialogue too. So what do we mean by that?
Listen, I say it to get people's attention. Of course you want to think outside the box, meaning you want to be innovative. And you don't want to be behind the curve. You want to be ahead of the curve in terms of how can I find new ways to bring value. Of course, and the way I say it is you want to think outside the box for what purpose? For winning inside the box. And all I mean by inside the box is what are the things that the customer attaches the most value to? What is most important to any given customer or prospect? That's how I define inside the box. In the book, I write a story about a mythical hamburger restaurant. And Bill is trying to figure out, how can I get more customers? And he thinks of everything from I'm going to start a Facebook page to I'm going to start a blog about hamburgers to I'm going to hire a magician to go all through the restaurant all day to I'm going to give people little candy hamburgers when they leave. That'll be my wow factor. And the thing that never occurs to him is, what if you made a better hamburger? What if you made the best hamburger in town? Now, I'm not saying the other stuff is not a good idea. I mean, I work on my social media. I just hired a company to help me do it much better. But I'm saying focus on the basics. That's your biggest wow factor is to make the best hamburger. So don't get distracted by, as you called it, these Herculean efforts, which can be taking your focus away from the core of what you should be doing.
You know, wholesalers, this has particular relevance. By the time we release this, we're going to be right smack dab in the middle of 2013 planning. So I want you to think about wholesalers. I want you to think about this tremendous insight that Joe is offering. And how does it play back to how you plan 2013? How does it play back to how you plan any year? Are you focusing the right amount of resources and the right amount of both diligence and vigilance around these things that are going to help you with the basics, making the better burger, if you will?
You know, it's funny, Rob. I hear this, and you may hear it too. I'll have people that I work with that'll say, Joe, I'm doing absolutely everything I can think of to make this business go, and it's still not to the point where it ought to be. And my response is, well, that could be your problem, because the winners in business today aren't the ones that do everything. The winners are the ones that do the most important things, and they bring focus and clarity and simplicity. That's another thing I hear. The people whose businesses are struggling will tend to say to me, Joe, I got to tell you, this is a really complicated business. And the people that are doing extremely well will say, and you know what I'm about to say, they'll say, Joe, at the end of the day, this is a pretty simple business. Steve Jobs said something that, man, this was an interview Robbie did with Wired magazine a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And he said, it takes a lot of hard work to get your thinking clean enough to make things simple. But it's worth the work, because if you can make things simple, you can move mountains. I loved that word choice of get your thinking clean enough. Because I'm as guilty as anybody, Rob. I make it too complicated. And sometimes I have to take a step back and go, whoa, what really matters? What's most important? I'm going off on tangents here, and they're distracting me from what I ought to be working on, like learning more about the prospect, learning more about the client, because I know that pays off.
Joe Calloway, you have successfully added to a litany of phenomenal guests we have had. Wholesalers, jump back out to the website, pick up the link to Joe's book. We'll make sure that we post up his new book when it does come out in 2013. Joe, on behalf of our wholesalers that are listening, a deep and sincere thank you for joining us on Wholesaler Mastermind Radio.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Wholesalers, come back next time for another episode of Wholesaler Masterminds Radio.
It was a heated debate. On one side of the argument was the national sales manager who put his foot down and said, no, we will not allow schedulers to do the work wholesalers should be doing. On the other side of the argument was the long-tenured, successful wholesaler who argued that having a scheduler was a huge efficiency and productivity gain for her business. So, who was right? Well, they both were. At Wholesaler Mastermind Schedulers, we believe that the first contact to schedule a meeting with a prospective advisor or COI should most effectively come from you, as your voice should be the first that they hear. We also believe that for your existing advisor clients, we can save you a ton of time and make you much more effective by letting us do the scheduling. To learn more about Wholesaler Mastermind Schedulers, visit us at wmmschedulers.com.